In 2003, Hyung-Ah's life was cut short, as she was innocently taking a shorter route home after spending some time with a friend. For a murder so brief and unplanned, you'd think finding the culprit would be quite easy with evidence carelessly left behind at the murder scene, but you couldn't be farther from the truth. No one knew that this fateful night in South Korea would forever haunt not only the supposed witnesses, but everyone who heard news of it across the globe. Who killed Hyung-Ah? What happened that night? And why is her death still remembered? Join us as we go back in time to the moments before Hyung-Ah breathed her last. Hyung's strange disappearance. Hyung-Ah, a middle school student in her second year, resided in Pocheon, Gyeonggi Province, with her parents. On November 5, 2003, she visited her friend's house after school to spend some time together. A few hours passed and it got late. Hyung had an appointment with her mother, and it was almost time for it. So she became concerned about being late and chastising her. She thought quickly and informed her mother that she would take a shortcut home to beat time. Hyung left her friend's house around 6 p.m., starting what she thought would be a brief 10-minute walk. But she never arrived at her destination. Her friend had no idea she never made it home. After an hour of waiting, her parents tried to contact her, only to find out that her phone was switched off. This prompted them to quickly report her disappearance to the authorities. Even though their response was quick, it was unfortunately too late to prevent the tragic murder that had already happened. 23 days after Hyung-Ah went missing, the story made headlines because, surprisingly, her personal belongings were found 7 kilometers away from her residence in Ujeongbu. The belongings included her school bag, tie, and notebooks, but with all name tags deliberately torn off. The fact the name tags were missing increased the public's speculation that she may have been tragically murdered. But the investigation failed to provide any convincing theory, further leads, or evidence beyond that. Until weeks later, more items, such as her phone and shoes, were found. But still, the case remained stalled. The police were under a lot of pressure from residents of the neighborhood to find out any information that could possibly lead them to Hyung and reveal how, why, and the exact time she suddenly went missing. They were scared their neighborhood wasn't safe anymore, so they needed answers as quickly as possible. However, it wasn't until a witness came forward, 3 weeks into the investigation, that the police finally had their first lead. The witness claimed to have seen a Kia Carnival driving by the place where Hyung was last seen at the same time she disappeared. This piece of information proved to be very helpful to the police, as it gave them a specific car to look for and direction to whom they needed to investigate. The police started searching for the Kia Carnival right away and asked around the area if anyone had seen the car on camera. Unfortunately, nothing came out of that search. But luckily, the same witness who had allegedly seen the car gave the police another lead in the case, and they redirected their search. The police found a Kia Carnival in a nearby town that matched what the witness described. But when they looked inside the car, they didn't find anything that connected it to Hyung's disappearance. The police were disappointed, but they had no idea the case would take many more twists and turns before the truth was finally revealed. The police became increasingly upset that they hadn't found any clues or solved the case, so they decided to do a more elaborate operation to search for Hyung. They asked the military to lend a helping hand. The search went on for weeks, but it wasn't until 95 days after Hyung's disappearance, on February 8, 2004, that they finally found something. It turned out that what they had been looking for so long was in plain sight the whole time. They discovered Hyung's body lying naked in a big concrete pipe that was used for drainage next to a highway in Pocheon, with the entrance to the pipe covered with a box. From their observations, the police were convinced the victim's body had been in a small space for a while before it was put in the pipe, due to how her body was curled up inside the pipe. The box that covered the entrance to the pipe was just a regular box used for throwing away the trash, and there were no signs of a struggle or anything that showed the victim was tied up. The police also looked for signs of sexual assault, but they didn't find any DNA evidence on the victim's body. It was at that moment the police knew they were dealing with a serial killer. Nails painted red. One particularly strange thing the police noticed was that the victim's fingernails and toenails were all painted red. This was clearly odd because she didn't have red nail polish on at the time she disappeared. The police tried to figure out what kind of nail polish was used on her nails, even trying to identify the specific brand and type, but they couldn't find out anything about it, leading them to yet another dead end in the case. Even while working hand in hand with the military, the police seemed to be making no progress at all. They were unable to identify a suspect, and it was almost like the killer had perfectly covered his tracks. However, 16 years later, things started to look up when a TV show called Crime Scene decided to take a fresh look at the case. The show was known to be good at using new ways of investigating and new technology to solve cases that had gone cold. The team working on the show, led by an expert in forensic science, went over the evidence again and talked to witnesses another time, hoping to find new clues and understand the case better. One of the major findings of the program's investigation was that Aom's death was likely caused by a cervical compression rather than a head injury. This was a significant discovery, as the original autopsy report had concluded that Aom's death was caused by blunt force trauma to the head. The team used advanced forensic analysis and digital reconstruction to re-examine the crime scene and Aom's body, and they found evidence of a cervical compression that was consistent with a violent grabbing or choking motion. This new information changed the direction of the investigation and raised new questions about the killer's motives and behavior. The TV show did some more digging and found some new witnesses who had information and some new clues that the police didn't know about the first time they investigated. The show even found a new suspect who they were convinced actually committed the crime, someone the police could have never suspected at all. They also did more research on the Kia vehicle that was seen near where the crime happened, which seemed suspicious. The team also tried to understand why the person who did it might have done it and how they might have acted, by using special techniques to figure out what criminals might do, and they came up with a new idea about what happened. These new findings were all completely different from what the police thought the first time they investigated. After the TV show Crime Scene shared their new findings, some people came forward to help the investigation, finally giving the police a lead on what the killer might look like. As fate would have it, a woman who worked at a makeup store remembered a weird encounter. She recalled a young man buying bright red nail polish, which was unusual because men didn't typically buy nail polish back then. She described him as feminine-looking, with pale skin, average height, and acting shy. Weirdly, he called her Unnie, which is a term usually used by women to address older women, like a sign of respect, and this detail stuck in her memory. The same suspect. Right after the woman shared her story, the police started searching again. Due to their hard work and the new information, they were able to figure out the number on the car's license plate and who the car belonged to. After that, another woman, who people called Hyung-Ah, came forward to share what she knew. Her information matched the new clues they had found. According to her, 16 years ago, around the same time and in the same area where Hyung-Ah disappeared, a strange man tried to kidnap her too. Her description was very detailed, but what the police found most interesting was that he forced her to get in his car and wouldn't let her out, but she managed to get away from him somehow. She was very lucky, unlike Eon. However, because it happened 16 years ago, Hyung-Ah had to be hypnotized to help her remember the details of the incident more clearly. When she was hypnotized, she described the man in a way that matched what the cashier had said. She stated that had features that looked feminine and pale skin, adding more details, including the shape of his fingers, which she claimed were slender. She was also able to remember the number on the car's license plate, stating that the car seemed to have followed her from the nearby factory where cars are made. The police were able to get a rough idea of what the murderer might have looked like, based on the descriptions they got from the witnesses. Not just that, they also found out where the suspect worked, which was the car factory that Hyung-Ah had mentioned when she was hypnotized. In fact, one of the workers at the factory claimed that the police sketch of the suspect, which showed an older-looking face, looked like one of his co-workers. According to him, the suspect was known to always act strangely at work. He always had clean and nicely trimmed nails, even though they did manual labor and got their hands dirty all the time. And he would wash his hands all the time too. The suspect also acted in a way that seemed feminine, and would get scared and run away when he saw bugs. Over the years, the police continued to have some clues that basically pointed at this same suspect, but the clues weren't convincing enough to arrest him right away. Interestingly, sometime during their search, a few investigators refused to believe the suspect truly committed the crime, as such brutality wasn't typical from Koreans in that area. They were convinced the murderer was Indian or Japanese. Sadly, the investigation hit a dead end, when the only suspect they had died before they could even talk to him. To make matters worse, his body was cremated, so they couldn't get any DNA evidence. At the end of it all, the police never found out for sure who killed EOM, and even after all these years, the case remains unsolved, with no main suspect left, leaving us with a mystery that may never be solved. Did you ever hear of this murder? And what are the plot holes you think the Korean police didn't notice? We would love to know in the comments. If you enjoyed watching this video, don't forget to leave a like, share it with your family and friends, and subscribe to our channel so you don't miss our next updates. Also, click the next video on your screen to enjoy more exciting content.